Alright guys, HyDra back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. The roster announcements and rumours are everywhere lately, and this time we're talking about Los Angeles Thieves again. A full team of 4 that was rumoured last night. Afro and Cammy that we discussed the other day. A very interesting 4th option, but also a debate between Ghosty and aBeZy to be their main AR or flex player potentially for the roster. Who's the player to go with? Could Ghosty do better than this team theoretically? Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate. Plenty to get into today. Firstly, wanted to mention because there's these World Series of Warzone qualifiers going on around the world, and there's been, as there always is, some cheating allegations flying around. This with regard to the fact that people can watch others' streams while they're competing, so they can just basically tell their teammates what's going on, where these guys are. Seems a bit of an oversight, to be honest, that this is actually possible with whatever delays or whatever that they might potentially should have on these streams. But yes, that's been a big talking point. Players have been not happy at all about the results of this. I believe Clayster and his team, they're playing in it, or at least that's their intention, so we'll see how far they get over the coming couple of days, I believe, where the qualifiers are still continuing on somewhat in the background in the different regions. Speaking of Clay, there was also this I thought was pretty funny, just because Messi scored that free kick last night for Miami, or into Miami in the MLS, and the reaction was pretty interesting, and there was this talking point where I do just wonder what you guys think about Clay to a team like the Miami Heretics. We saw that Ben J. Nassim the other day said if he had to put money on it, he'd probably say Los Angeles Guerrillas is a pretty decent target for Clay. And we'll see in a second with what Thieves are looking to do here. It might mean that the players that we thought might be linked to Thieves might go to the Vancouver Surge, because that was actually a talking point a couple of weeks ago now, that they're going to bring Rambo in as their coach Surge, and they're going to build at least partially a French-speaking roster. So that might be a little bit of a plan. We'll see about that, and that could mean Clay to either Guerrillas or potentially to the Minnesota Rokkr, maybe to Miami Heretics alongside those Spanish guys. It would be really interesting. Not sure it's especially likely, but I do hope Clay gets a good spot next season that isn't stuck on Vegas again, if he does still want to compete, even if he has to play on Vegas, because he might have second thoughts about that. This also on the Boston Breach. This was a rumor that was going around. Well, actually it was confirmed by Beans himself, and then the discussion was by Drew here, that the goal for Boston is to help him get to a team where he can have success for next year, but he's on a favourable contract that will have interested teams in buying him out, apparently, which is pretty interesting, because I would have thought that at this point in the Rostermania period, do any of the teams remaining want to buy out a guy like Beans? I'm not necessarily so sure. I think Beans was solid, and I think somewhat underrated, actually, for Boston. People seem to think he was terrible, but I think Beans was pretty good, and I think he's got potentially a bright future ahead of him. It's not going to be on Boston, though, because they're going for Slash at Priestahh. That makes perfect sense, I think. Beans has been released, really. Well, not released. He's a restricted free agent. His contract still exists. Pretty sure they signed him on a 2+1. So his deal is, well, he should be guaranteed another year. But the thing is with these contracts, they're not really guaranteed. On paper, it's oh wow, 2+1 or 1+1 or whatever, but if they want to drop you halfway through the season or at the end of the season before your contract season ends, they can just pretty much do it anyway. I don't know if they have to, I'm pretty sure Beans isn't going to be guaranteed his second year salary if they just decide to terminate the deal. So a lot of these contracts are just very much favouring the teams and not the players, because, Beans is either going to be stuck there on the Boston bench, or they're going to decide to release his contract. And I'm not necessarily sure he gets paid out if they do. Obviously, I don't know the terms of the deal, but there's certain arrangements where that's been the case previously. But Drew reckons that some teams will be interested in getting him, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's interest in Beans, but I'm not sure there's going to be interest in Beans for a buyout figure, given the fact that there's so many other free agents on the market that you could go for instead, and it's really SMG talent that is at a premium right now, rather than AR talent, right? You can find decent ARs from a lot of different avenues. Finding decent SMGs, that's your real challenge. If Beans was a submachine gun player, then there probably would be players that would, teams that would want to buy him out of his deal. As a flex AR, I'm not so sure, but I guess we'll see about this. Obviously, Awakening's also looking for his next step as well, so we'll see about that, but wishing the best, of course, for Beans, and there's maybe a chance that they give it 2 or 3 weeks, Boston, just to see if there's any interest in buying him out for another team, and if there isn't, they might just decide to release him and let him go wherever he likes. Thought this is also an interesting thread here from Priestahh, who's talking about the truth behind these +1 deals and how the teams will say, oh yeah, for year 2, when we extend you on the 1+1 deal, we'll give you, you know, increased salaries, better compensation when it's exercised, but they very rarely actually do any of this stuff. So, yeah, pretty interesting this thread actually, just discussing how the players are not in the advantage when it comes to a lot of these deal arrangements at the present time. Let's go on to the next thing then, because, well, actually, this is relevant to that, because, like, this is basically what the deals do. Your guaranteed contract salary deal just disappears like arse teas here when the teams want it to. But let's talk Thieves. We saw the other day from CDL Rostermania that they were holding an interest in Afro and Cammy. Those were the two players discussed at the time. Ronnie then goes on to retweet both those tweets last night, implying that that's closer to happening than it was previously. And then we get the news that Thieves is being targeted to play alongside them. So this is a potential team of 3, and we're going to dive into all of these individual players and why this might be a good or a bad thing in a couple of seconds. And then we get this from Drew Pescaro, who says that it's going to be Cammy, Afro, Thieves with a 4th player of either Ghosty or aBeZy. So Ghosty, of course, formerly OpTic, and then aBeZy, formerly aBeZy, right? I mean, he's going to get a spot somewhere. He was the standout player of challenges for the last season, Belgian player, French, but also pretty good English speaking, and is one of those players in Scrappy's position from last year that had a great challenger side, and people are hoping and expecting he's going to be able to elevate that to some degree on the CDL professional level. To be honest, I thought aBeZy was the type of player that Thieves would be scrambling to get, because Nadeshot made the point the other day that he wants Thieves this season to be the place for a lot of young talent to go start their career off well at Thieves, and it would be cheaper to acquire some of these guys than it would be to get more veteran players. So I thought aBeZy would have made a lot of sense here, and I actually still think that might be a good idea. But I also like Ghosty, and I think if Thieves can get Ghosty, they should. So we'll discuss what this means in a second, but Jegabel also corroborates this and says that from his point of view, aBeZy isn't in the conversation so much. I think aBeZy was talked about, and it was like, oh, could aBeZy and Lins go there from the aBeZy guys as a duo alongside Cammy and Afro, or would they not bother and they'd go down a different route? And seemingly most sources are saying that it's Ghosty, not aBeZy. And I think there's an argument to say that they should get both, but anyway, this isn't yet locked in. Contracts aren't signed. This is the direction they're heading according to rumours. So if you're a Thieves fan, what's your first impression here? Because many people are saying, oh, it's mid, it's terrible, but there isn't that much you can do when you're not a top 4 team right now. Like, if you don't have the budget of the Boston guys that can pay Slasher and Priestahh big bucks to go join them, and you don't have the talent, let's be honest, of the top 4 teams theoretically, there isn't that much you can do. This is, I think, one of the best teams they theoretically can form. I think there's actually quite a few risks in here that they're taking, but I like the general idea. So Afro, I think, is a great player. I think of all the SMGs in the league, Afro is the one that I would have got if I could. I think he's got a very high ceiling. He is a player that can be a bit inconsistent, right? It's the same thing. This is the reason why maybe Nero isn't going here, because in my head, I'm like, all right, Afro and Nero, I get those two, because they both have ceilings as being one of the best SMGs in the game, but they also could drop the occasional, or actually sometimes quite often, 0.7 and just look completely terrible. So very inconsistent, and Afro can be pretty inconsistent as well. I think honestly though, Afro's more inconsistent when he's required to be like the do-it-all sub, when you've got him entrying, and I just think that Afro, when he's on that entry role, sometimes just gets caught in the blender. I'd prefer him to be on like the slightly slower slaying role and have a faster SMG alongside him, and I think Afro can really thrive in that situation with good coaches, Jacob and Shane, let's not forget. I think they can get a lot out of Afro, and I think they can get a lot out of this team. So Afro to me is a no-brainer. He'd been one of the first guys that I went for, and it seems like they're going for him, which I think is a good decision. Alongside Afro though, as I say, Nero would be an option that comes to mind, but then I'm like, do you want to maybe more inconsistent subs? Maybe not. So they're looking at Thieves. And honestly, I quite like this idea. I know that people are going to be like, oh, like, no way, this guy was on Los Angeles Guerrillas, didn't have a great season, but let's be honest, he was the bright spot, and I thought that he did earn his spot in the league somewhere next season. I didn't think it would be on a team like Thieves, but then again, I didn't think they would have, effectively run out of money and need to go for these type of players. But I think he did a solid job, especially in Search and Destroy. I think one of his key stats of the year was he had tied or very much up there for the most aces of the year, which is pretty impressive, really. Shows that, okay, he doesn't always have great rounds, but when he does have great rounds, he can be very impactful in Search and Destroy. Was decent enough in the respawns, given the fact that his team was just shocking. He was the bright spot. And let's not forget, this guy's only like 18. He's 19 probably for this season. He's got a lot of room for growth and improvements. And people are saying, oh no, get a Challengers SMG instead. But it's like, Ghosty might as well be a Challengers SMG. He came from the ranked play system, really. Okay, he was known for playing other tournaments, but people started to know about this guy from ranked during Vanguard. Gets a spot in the Pro League. People are talking trash in his name. Shows out to a pretty respectable standard. And I think should only improve over time. So it's like, should you get a Challengers player that people are saying, oh, get Gwyn, get, you know, even Linz or something, right? And I think good players for sure, and they can be great things in the Pro League. But I think people are only saying that because they're somewhat unproven. They're like, oh, is Gwyn going to draw 1.2? Like, because people don't really know. Whereas because you've seen Ghosty, this is the curse in some sense of being on a bad team. That people see you and think, oh, well, you know, you played on a bad team for a bit, did okay, but you're nothing special, so let's not bother. But I think that of all the options out there, Ghosty is not a bad one. Can he play the role that they need alongside Afro? I'm not sure he's necessarily the best option there. I think there are other options, but clearly they see some bright potential and future in Joey D, so maybe that's going to be the case, and I hope that it is. So I actually quite like what they're thinking here with the Ghosty pickup. Then we get to the Ghosty question, and to be honest, for me, if you can get Ghosty in your Thieves, you do it almost for sure. He proved to be pretty good on the OpTic team last season, was critical from a leadership perspective to their success, and I think that, you know, Thieves need a player like that in their roster, to be honest. People would say, could Ghosty do better than this? But to be honest, if there's no option over there on Boston, which there's not, because he's not going to be there as the flex role, Priestahh is going to be there, Priestahh's not running a sub. So what is Ghosty's other options, right? Maybe Rokkr or something, but is that team going to be better than what Thieves are forming? I don't think so. Are they going to offer more money? Not necessarily. So I think that of all the teams like that are being formed, they might be in a similar kind of ballpark theoretically to this one. So I think that this makes sense for Ghosty. And if you're Thieves, Ghosty is definitely a player you want to get. He's got high upside. Yes, his numbers here don't look great, but he was dropping similar numbers to aBeZy and Scrappy or whatever at times in challenges when he was on a role that was, you know, conducive to that. Then he played a very different role on OpTic. Now, look, we know that the Ghosty Dashy friction was there at the end of last season, absolutely, and was that, you know, some people would say, oh, Dashy's just a crybaby. Some would say that Ghosty, like, you know, his character is a little bit hard to work with. There might be some truth to both elements of those. And I don't think it's at all guaranteed that Ghosty and the other guys in this team actually get on like a house on fire when it works. But I think they've got the coaching staff over there to facilitate that. And I think that Ghosty, if he is like put into that more slaying AR position and he can do the leadership and the comms, I think he's a valuable asset. So I think this is a good decision for Thieves. To me, the biggest question is probably Cammy. It didn't work. Like, I like Cammy, absolutely. Great player for European COD for many years. But I think there's a real debate about whether he's the best option here, because Cammy and Afro didn't work together well on Minnesota last year. And that makes sense, right? They had a bit of a shambolic season. He hasn't been particularly impressive at all for the last couple of years. I'm not sure how he and Ghosty would get on from an AR perspective, who'd run the main, would it work from like a personality perspective? I'm not so convinced, but still, Cammy at his ceiling is very high, and that's what Thieves are going for. They're going for players that there's some risk attached here, but if they get the best versions of those players, they can theoretically compete. And I can understand that perspective. There is also part of me, though, that says, would it not be a decent idea to try and get aBeZy and Ghosty? You know, like, I look at this team and I think, I like the Afro thing, I like the Ghosty thing for sure. I think Ghosty is kind of an underrated pick here, but I'm thinking, you know, could they get aBeZy instead of Cammy and just try and make it work with those guys? Maybe they could, but that's not their current intention, it seems. So there's been a few alternate rosters that have been thrown around here, like what they could have done, like could they have got Gwyn and this type of stuff, and most people are saying that option 2 here is the one to go for. I'm not so convinced. I actually quite like what they're doing here, Thieves, but if you're a Thieves fan, you're probably not looking at this team thinking, damn, like, let's go, we got all the boys we wanted, like, we're going to be frying this season. It's an interesting composition of players. I don't know if it's the best option out there, but I think they're doing a respectable job currently in how they're looking to build this team. Things could certainly change over the coming days. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.